Hi, my name is Coffee, and this is Nullius. Nullius is a mod for Factorio. Factorio is a game about making factories. Nullius is a game about making factories to make life on an alien planet. It builds on everything that's in the base game, and it creates a new and distinctly challenging scenario. It's very fun. I wanted to show off several bases that I've made and other fun things, but I also wanted to completely destroy my starter base, hopefully for somebody's enjoyment. Now, I'm going to put down some lights because night's coming, and that's going to show more or less what's going to go away. But, while I'm doing that, why blow everything up? Including the iron. And it's obviously not laziness, because if it were laziness, I wouldn't be destroying resources like iron. I'd just let it sit and maybe somehow get a train in here. Or just belt everything out. That would be another good idea. But why blow up everything in this circle? Well, that's why. Those 4 substations there. These tanks that aren't connected to anything. That's why. These underground belts that just sort of go... Yeah. That's why. That and about 3 or 4 other mistakes which make me lump this entire thing in as a tactical success, but strategically it's a fail. And to understand why I built something where I'd be willing to take it out with a slight provocation, because it's not even really that I would do this normally. I'd just throw it all into boxes and, you know, maybe shoot the boxes. Save the iron, you know? But there are some things going on here. And you have to understand it all in the context that you're going to run into it. So I'm going to get into my time machine. I'm going to go back. I'm going to show you why all of this more or less is the way it is. I'm not going to show you any of the recipes or anything in terribly too much detail, because I figure that if you want to know those, you'll get the mod and play it yourself. And you should. It's a fun one. But into the time machine we go, and maybe you'll end up with something you like more after you see what I did. And whoop, out of the time machine. So, I've got this set up here, which is the sort of assembly line you usually lose after the first 25 minutes of normal Factorio. This is 4 different kinds of hand feeding. One machine used to be here. That's what these boxes are. So those were being fed into an assembly machine right here that fed into this, where this box is. Right? That got replaced. That has its own dedicated base with an experimental train line. that moved so slowly that it broke my heart. And I since was married to bells. If I want to do anything, that will be 7 items total. 4 different categories. So that's about as complicated as some recipes get in standard Factorio. That's not an easy ask. Granted, I can have Muddy Arm become a long inserter whenever I want, but it's rough. Also, my power grid just does whatever it wants. It's doing 8 kilowatts right now. Ooh, a full 8 watts. So because of that, and how unreliable everything is, I'm just making components off of this little base here. And there are some things like ingots, which are pretty reliable, which turn into sticks and rods and sheets and wires. And then there's things like steel, which is so terribly rationed at this point that I am manually taking it from this box and putting it into these boxes so I know exactly what I'm making and how much I have available. And there's this thingamajig, which is making green juice and purple juice. The green juice is useful because it busts down those rocks into sludge, and that can get turned into seawater. Otherwise, everything locks up. Any extra green and purple juice are turned into saline and thrown into the ocean. Because that's all it takes. Oh. Oops. But I have bigger fish to fry than that. So there's these 6 arms here, and these 10 30 items per second belts. Obviously, none of these assembly lines move at much more than, like, an item. Does that even look like a second? Like, some of these are items per minute. Items per second. Completely useless. Why is it here at all? Well, I've got this checkpoint. And this checkpoint says, get an extractor 1 and use it to get 5,000 volcano gas. If I don't physically take this extractor 1 over to here and somehow get 5,000 gas, then all research halts. And I get nothing. So that's the main priority. It's arguably an even bigger priority than normal research at this point, because this is what I've got at hour 40. So I've just sat down and I am trying to knock through these checkpoints just as quick as I can. And my base is growing random stuff as a result. Sometimes there are messes that get made and I can do nothing about them, but hey, it's all getting done and everything is getting managed. I totally know what this stuff in this pipes is, and that's why it's getting neutralized in this building here. Oops. Right. Out of the time machine once again. And I am working on this generator. You can tell I'm working on it because that pipe is actually going to shut everything down if it's there. But in spite of all of the braking noises and the things that come naturally to me, like forgetting pipes, more's working than is failing. Now there's some stuff that's going wrong. I'm actually pointing at something that's going wrong right now in this build. But there's no great way to tell because I've got multiple power systems working on something at a given time. And even though this is bad, this is still better than handcrafting here. Because this is going to turn into about an item per second. And everything's working here, but it's strange because this neutralization scheme that's knocking out the 42 stuff that turns into 100 stuff and then the 42 goes away in here. Well, that idea works here. But over here, for some reason, it works for a little while and then it completely grinds to a halt. And I'm trying to put circuit locks on things so that a certain amount of this acid is produced and will neutralize naturally with this stuff. But that's the least of my problems. I've got to make 10 of these chemical plants too. And it's another one of those points where, oh great, I'm making 10 of these things, which move twice as fast. I can't even use that for anything. I am on electrical engineering next, if not a mall. A mall's looking more likely right now. Because this is about the extent of what I can get away with doing by hand. After I get those 10 things out, I have to get 3 random things and then flip them around as a tutorial, which presumably every time I ever play through this game, I will have to complete that tutorial, regardless of my wishes. So, yeah. things are not great, but they sort of work. Alright, here we are at hour 1:30, and I'm out in the middle of nowhere. And things have started to break. Now, if you look at my map, it looks like I have something good going on here with some spaced out mines. The only real difference between this and a normal Factorio game is, of course, there's biters, 1, and 2. My mines have trains going to them because there's a decent fuel logistic. In terms of how things are really and truly going, well, between 28 hours and 18 hours, there is an ongoing issue with chlorine where I didn't read the recipe, and so it locked up every 30 minutes, it seemed like, and the graph more or less does confirm that assumption on my end. Circuits were tried, everything was tried, except for reading the darn recipe. And once I did realize what was going on, it's like, oh, chlorine doubles, chlorine gets multiplied by 8/7 into hydrochloric acid. I had a chemical engineering research for voiding chlorine more efficiently coming up. I got that done. I think about somewhere between 2 and 8 hours of playing time down the road, I realized that you could just take mineral dust and throw it onto the chlorine wholesale, which means that I could essentially have just been running a sacrificial mine of calcite to get hydroxide for researches. My power at that power station here that I was showing off never worked correctly, so I had to go back in and install a completely different power system on top of that. And that's time spent. And I'm about to embark on a trip that is going to end in me going, this is not feasible, this is not possible, I can't do this, and I have to cut my losses and go somewhere else. So, what that trip is bringing these sets of train 1s all the way out here at 120 kilometers per hour with as much methanol as I can spare so I don't get stuck, and a car, and hoping to produce a plant capable of generating thermal collectors and solar panel 1s. And at about 16 hours in, I'm looking at the demand that I would need for aluminum rods and aluminum sheets And I'm looking at the fact that the thermal collectors would also need steel and glass. And I'm going... You're setting up assembly lines that are as big as the ones that are for your first mall, but that are going to do 2 products, while your mall seems to be pumping out things at a regular rate, unlike everything else you've built up to this point. And you're doing it at a scale where it's taking you 16 hours to make any kind of headway for 2 things. This just isn't feasible. You need another mall. That was about 16 hours of playtime. And I look over at the checkpoints and I say, okay, we're done. There's just not the actual manufacturing capacity being produced by these things to realistically get headway in the mod. And in terms of expertise and building things, I don't have assembly lines set up for any of the things that I've made 40 of. So I walked away from several hundred buildings being pulled off of the train and an entire line being set up for aluminum. I didn't even pick up the buildings. It would take too long to mine them and return them to my inventory. Alright, so where does that put me? That puts me at hour 3:30, going, I have one more checkpoint to clear, of many. It's all important, but nuclear fusion is more important. So, yeah. Why not just get rid of this thing, which has probably cost me 30 hours, which is 10% of my playtime, by existing and housing all of these little random distractions to, which compared to building an assembly line, like, you'll get more out of that, period. That's about where all the chlorine is. Put it there. See how big this thing goes. Hold on a second. Hold on a second. That's not the size of that circle. Well, wow. I guess depending on where you launch this thing, you could really do some damage. And that's why there's checkpoints. Alright. Well, that was enough fun.
This is Coffee signing off. I hope you all have a good time.